My name is Daniel Reeves, and on the night of my retirement, I learned exactly how easy it is for a lifetime of loyalty to disappear in a room full of applause that isn't meant for you. The decorations were already in place when I arrived, gold and white banners stretched across the walls. A long table lined with catered food no one really planned to eat. And a slideshow looping quietly in the background, filled with pictures of company milestones that I recognized more intimately than anyone else in that room ever could. I stood near the back, just inside the doorway, watching people greet each other with rehearsed warmth, shaking hands, laughing a little louder than necessary, as if they were performing their roles in a celebration that felt more obligatory than genuine. Some of them noticed me and gave polite nods. Others avoided eye contact entirely, and a few walked over to shake my hand, offering the same hollow phrases, "Congratulations, Daniel, you've had an incredible run. Enjoy the next chapter," words that sounded right but felt strangely disconnected, like they had been memorized rather than meant. I thanked them, smiled when expected, and held onto a glass of champagne I had no intention of drinking, mostly just to give my hands something to do. 32 years. That's how long I had been with the company. 32 years of early mornings and late nights. Of solving problems no one else wanted to touch. Of stepping in quietly when things were about to fall apart. Of choosing work over family more times than I care to admit now. I had been there when the company was nothing more than an idea and a rented office above a hardware store. When we didn't even have proper desks and used folding chairs that creaked every time someone shifted their weight. I had watched it grow, struggle, nearly collapse, and then rise again stronger than before. I hadn't just worked there. I had built pieces of it with my own hands, decisions, and sacrifices. And yet, as I stood in that room, it felt like I was attending someone else's celebration. Like I had already become a footnote in a story that I once helped write. When Gregory Halley finally entered, the atmosphere changed immediately. Conversation straightened. Laughter sharpened. People turned toward him instinctively, like flowers leaning toward sunlight. And he moved through the room with effortless confidence, shaking hands, offering quick compliments, positioning himself at the center of everything without ever appearing to try. He wore success the way some people wear expensive suits, comfortably, naturally, as if it had always belonged to him. And in a way, to everyone else in that room, it did. The speech began about 20 minutes later, once everyone had settled into loose clusters around the room. Glasses filled and attention loosely gathered toward the front where a small stage had been set up. Gregory stepped up to the microphone with the ease of someone who had done this countless times before, tapping it lightly as if to confirm what everyone already knew, that the room belonged to him now. He started with a joke, something light about retirement, meaning finally having time to do nothing. And the room responded exactly as expected, with polite laughter that filled the space, just enough to smooth the transition into something more formal. Then he shifted tone, speaking about the company's journey, about its growth, its resilience, its ability to adapt in changing markets, and as he spoke, he wove himself into every major success, every turning point, every moment of triumph. He didn't say it directly, not in a way that could be called out, but the implication was clear. Under his leadership, the company had become what it was today. I listened carefully, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to see just how far he would go. And he went far. He thanked department heads, praising their innovation. He acknowledged newer employees, calling them the future of the company. He even singled out a group of interns, commending their energy and fresh perspectives. Each name was followed by applause, each acknowledgement reinforcing the narrative he was building, a narrative where progress was recent, success was current, and the past was little more than a stepping stone that didn't require specific recognition. My name never came. Not once. Not even indirectly. It wasn't an oversight. You don't forget someone after 3 decades. You choose not to mention them. And as that realization settled in, I found myself scanning the room, watching reactions. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Some glanced in my direction and then quickly looked away. Most simply continued listening, clapping when appropriate, accepting the version of events being presented to them because it was easier than questioning it. That, more than anything, stayed with me, the silence. Not hostile, not aggressive, just compliant. And in that silence, something inside me changed. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone else could see, but clearly enough that I understood one simple truth. Gregory believed I was part of the past, something already concluded, something that no longer held any power in the present. And that belief, quiet, confident, and completely wrong, was about to cost him everything, long before Gregory ever stepped into the company. Before board meetings became performances and leadership became something measured in visibility rather than substance. There was Thomas Calder, the man who started it all. Thomas wasn't charismatic in the way Gregory was. He didn't command rooms or deliver speeches that people remembered. What he did instead was listen, observe, and make decisions that often didn't make sense until much later, when you realized he had been thinking several steps ahead all along. I worked closely with him in those early years not because I had any special title, but because I showed up, stayed late, and cared about the outcome in a way that went beyond job descriptions. We spent countless evenings in that small office, going over numbers, revising plans, solving problems that seemed too big for a company our size. Sometimes we talked about the future not in grand, ambitious terms, but in practical ones: how to survive, how to grow without losing what made the company worth building in the first place. It was after one of our most difficult quarters, when we came dangerously close to shutting down, that Thomas asked me to stay behind after everyone else had left. He didn't explain why. He just handed me a folder and told me to take it home and read it carefully. I remember sitting at my kitchen table that night, opening it slowly, expecting financial projections or contingency plans. Instead, I found legal documents structured, detailed, and unmistakably significant. My name appeared throughout them, not as an employee or manager, but as a shareholder, tied to clauses that outlined ownership rights, voting power, and conditions that extended far beyond anything I had ever imagined for myself. I didn't fully understand it at first. It felt too large, too unexpected. The next day, I went back to him with questions, and he answered them in the simplest way possible. "You've been building this with me from the beginning," he said. "You deserve more than a paycheck." When I asked why he hadn't told anyone, he gave a small, almost knowing smile and said, "Because timing matters. And one day, you might need to remind people what this company actually is." I didn't argue. I didn't announce it. I filed the documents away, both physically and mentally, and continued working as I always had. Years passed. Leadership changed. Gregory arrived, bringing with him a different style, a different philosophy, and eventually, a different culture. And through it all, I remained exactly where I had always been: quiet, consistent, and, as far as anyone else was concerned, just another employee nearing the end of his career. Until that night, when the past he had ignored was about to step directly into the present. By the time Gregory reached the end of his speech, the room had fully accepted the version of reality he had presented. Glasses were raised, smiles were exchanged, and the applause that followed felt decisive, as if it had sealed something in place.
He lifted his own glass slightly, acknowledging the crowd.
Preparing to step away from the microphone, but before he could, I set mine down on the nearest table and began walking forward. It wasn't dramatic. There was no urgency in my steps, no visible anger in my expression. If anything, I moved with the same calm steadiness that had defined most of my career. A few people noticed at first. Conversations softened. Heads turned. The subtle shift spread through the room until the applause faded into something quieter, something uncertain. Gregory saw me then, really saw me, and for a brief moment, his confidence faltered, not enough for anyone else to fully recognize, but enough that I did. "Daniel," he said, his voice still carrying that practiced warmth, "would you like to say a few words?" I nodded once and stepped up beside him, reaching for the microphone. For a second, I didn't speak. I let the silence settle, let the room adjust to the unexpected interruption, let every eye focus on me in a way they hadn't all evening. Then I began, not with anger, not with accusation, but with something simpler. I thanked them. I thanked them for the years, for the opportunities, for the challenges. I spoke about the early days, about the uncertainty, about the work that had gone into building something from nothing. As I spoke, the room relaxed slightly, assuming this was the expected response: a polite farewell, a graceful exit. Then I shifted. "There's something else I should probably mention," I said, reaching into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulling out a folded set of documents I had carried with me that evening. Not out of impulse, but out of quiet preparation. I placed them on the podium, unfolding them carefully, deliberately, before continuing. A long time ago, the founder of this company made a decision that, until now, I've never had reason to bring up publicly. I paused, just long enough for curiosity to replace comfort. He transferred a significant portion of ownership into my name. Not as a gesture, not as a reward, but as a safeguard. The room didn't react immediately, not because they didn't hear me, but because they were still processing what it meant. Gregory's expression, however, changed instantly. Confusion first, then disbelief. And finally, something closer to concern. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was heavy, charged with the weight of something irreversible settling into place. I continued speaking, calmly, clearly, explaining what those documents represented: majority shares, voting rights, and clauses that had remained dormant for years. waiting for a moment when they might actually matter. I never used this, I said, my voice steady, because I never needed to. I believed in the people leading this company. I believed in the direction it was going. I glanced briefly at Gregory, not with hostility, but with a kind of quiet acknowledgement. But belief only works when it's mutual. Someone near the front shifted. Another person lowered their glass. The room was no longer a celebration, it was a turning point. Gregory stepped slightly closer, his voice lower now, controlled but strained. Daniel, he said, this isn't the time or place for... I didn't let him finish. Not by raising my voice, not by interrupting forcefully, but simply by continuing to speak as if he hadn't said anything at all. Effective immediately, I said, I'm exercising my rights as majority shareholder. That was the moment everything changed. Not gradually. Not subtly, instantly, the authority Gregory had carried so confidently, just minutes earlier, evaporated under the weight of a reality he hadn't seen coming. The room felt it. You could see it in the way people looked at him differently, not openly, not dramatically, but enough to know that the perception had shifted. Power, I realized, isn't just about what you have, it's about what others believe you have. And in that moment, what they believed about Gregory was no longer enough to hold him in place. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The documents spoke for themselves. The structure of the company supported it. And the truth, quiet, patient, and undeniable, had finally stepped into the light. I ended my remarks simply. No grand conclusion. No dramatic flourish. Just a final acknowledgement of the years I had given, and the future that, whether anyone expected it or not, was now mine to shape. Then I stepped away from the microphone, leaving behind a room that no longer knew how to respond, and a man who had just realized that the one